Who's the guy over here that kind of winks at him and smiles? You know what I'm talking about?
Wasn't that John J. McCloy?
I think it might have been.
Yeah.
Do we give Satan too much credit? He's not always winning each battle, right? Or he's allowing the deep state to battle each other, all the wicked people. But do they lose sometimes? Are they shook up right now, or are they just slyly backing off?
If you are in a government position, high government position, filtering information to Donald Trump, if you don't understand conspiracy, you're going to get blindsided by bad information from the NSA. I mean, if they come and tell you that so-and-so is a leader in conspiracy and we've got to take him out with a missile, how do you know? How do you know that they're telling you the truth? And in fact, this is even a bigger issue with Donald Trump's vow to release the files on JFK, RFK assassination, and Martin Luther King assassination. They were assuming that they'd be able to steal the election with truckloads of ballots in this election, and it didn't work because the RNC had lawyers with judges at speed dial on their telephone ready to stop any attempt to stop the counting. So yes, the deep state lost this thing, but they're not out for the count because they're still all there.
All right, brothers and sisters, welcome back once again. Joel Skousen to the program. Every month he comes on, and it's been great. It's been an incredible journey. Well, even politically, we're going to talk about that here in a second. Before we do that, let's vet what's going on with you with the World Affairs Brief. What is that, and how much does it cost?
Well, the World Affairs Brief is my weekly news analysis service from the standpoint of what the deep state controlled media and Democrat controlled governments aren't telling us. So it's a rather unique perspective. It is from a conspiratorial perspective. I'm a believer in secret combinations, that they've been around since the beginning of time. And anyone who denies that simply is in denial of reality. It's available on worldaffairsbrief.com, and on the front page, you generally see the current brief synopsis summary page. And when you click on request a sample on the left-hand side of the front page, you'll get that current brief plus options on how to subscribe. You can do it either by the week or by the month or by every 2 years. Or every year or 2 years. It's nominally $48 a year. And the price hasn't changed since the year 2000. So it's actually more than half price from when it began.
That's right. And you, that's a good perk. That's a really good perk. It's kind of like going to Costco where the hot dog and soda is still $1.50. That's going to
which you shouldn't be eating.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I've lost a lot of weight, and I'm on-road bicycling now with a friend of mine.
Wonderful.
So I've got my cardiovascular system up, and you can tell I've lost a lot of weight.
I can tell. It looks good on you.
Thank you. Anyway, I'm happy to see you, brother. We're going to dive right in here. We're going to talk about Trump, right? And we're going to talk about your expectations for his last and final administration. Yeah. Before we do that, let me ask you one question, and then you can kind of segue into what you're going to talk about about him. Sorry. But do you feel that we are coming out of wokeness? Was that a fad? Was that a phase? And it is a tactic too, as well. Anyway, explain how you will. Is that something dead or dying or coming back?
Well, it's not dead. It's not dying. What has happened, though, is that the lethargic large minority of conservatives and mainstream Americans have finally woken up to how bad it is and what it's doing to the country. That's the only difference. We must not confuse ourselves or deceive ourselves into thinking that we're the majority or that now the majority is anti woke. They aren't. We have still the younger generation being born, which, as you know, from my point of view, in the pre earth life, they get infected by what they see going on the earth, and they come here predisposed to certain things. Just like people of great talent like Mozart and Beethoven were composing and playing their spiritual pianos up there. They come down here. It's not a gift from God, lest they be arbitrary, but it is
Right.
something that you develop. If there is any great environmental influence, it is in the pre earth life, because we all come here with very well defined, hardened personalities. At least those that are strong have a lot of drive and intensity. They have very hardened personalities, and it's almost impossible to change those innate spiritual personalities. For those that are soft and weak, of which there is a majority of the young people being born, in my opinion, in this world, Gen Z and everyone else, that are very much manipulable by environmental determining factors. And so it is important that you shield children from these factors and not send them to public schools where they get infected with all of these things. And unfortunately, conservatives and members of the church uniformly send their kids to public schools and they get infected and they wonder why.
Yeah.
So the Trump victory represents the victory of a fed up minority. Now, remember that less than half of people vote. So we're talking about less than 50% in the first place. And of that 50%, only about 25% of those were Republicans. Now, think about that. That's not only a small minority, but the point is, it can be an effective minority if you vote with more intensity than the rest. Now,
Mm-hmm.
another 30% are independents, and another 30% are Democrats. And the Republicans dominate in the independents turned against wokeness to a large degree, which added to Trump's totals. But the only reason Trump won was because the RNC thwarted the steal to a large extent. They couldn't thwart the registration steal, where they registered hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens, but they did thwart the dumping of ballots into the hopper that would have occurred in the middle of the night had they been allowed to stop counting. And the RNC hired 3,500 attorneys to be at every single counting location in the swing states to make sure they did not stop voting or dump ballots in the middle of the night. And they hired 230,000 poll watchers to watch over this process. That's the only reason that Trump won. Otherwise, it would have been stolen as it was in 2020.
So they were cheating then. They were ready to take it. Do you think do you think it caught them by surprise?
Yes, it did. I mean, just like 2016, Hillary Clinton had already set her great gala celebration for winning. She had been told by the deep state she was going to win, and she was furious, so furious she couldn't even make a statement and had to go to bed with a sleeping pill or two sleeping pills. But in any case, the deep state isn't through with Donald Trump. And even though Donald Trump wants to drain the swamp, remember, if you really don't know the history of conspiracy, you can't know who was involved in deep state activities and who isn't. I mean, that's how you know, is you find out who was involved in the cover-up of JFK assassination, or who was involved in the cover-up of the 9/11 deep state operation, taking down the World Trade Center, or the Oklahoma City bombing, any of those things. You know, you can look at who in the FBI and who in the staff of the investigating committees was covering up for the truth, and you can find out who's deep state. And they show up. I mean, these people aren't going away. Now, some of these people have been dismissed from government, especially in the Justice Department. Pam Bondi has fired those that were involved with Jack Smith in the prosecution of Donald Trump. And some of them have resigned, earlier when Robert Mueller went out and James Comey went out. Some of those, like Lisa Page and others, went out too. But I can tell you this, that the real deep state is not this unelected bureaucracy within the government that is going to get pared down in size. In fact, the real deep state operators some of them, or a large portion of them, are not even on government payrolls. They have their own secret source of funding in the deep state, and so they can't be fired by going through the government payrolls. And a lot of those are in deep cover right now. They're mid-level bosses. Now remember that all of the heads of CIA, NSA, Defense Intelligence, those have to be deep state people because they have to protect the dark side of government that's inside their particular agencies. But once those get removed and changed, and Kash Patel now is going to be FBI director, and you have Tulsi Gabbard as DNI, Director of National Intelligence. Now, these people really don't understand the deep state to the degree that I do, nor do they understand conspiracy theory. But they're going to try to at least make judgments based upon loyalty to Donald Trump. And that's not the same as draining the swamp or detecting true deep state operations. But I'll tell you, there's an entire military deep state that runs ISIS and Al Qaeda and other terrorist attacks. In the NSA, there's an entire deep state operation that covers for and directs the military operations for terrorism. And they're the ones that fed the false information to Donald Trump through General Milley about General Soleimani being the greatest threat to terror or sponsor of terror in the world, which he was not. He was the greatest sponsor of those that were going after U.S.-backed terror. And there's a difference. So it is wonderful that Donald Trump has taken away the security clearances of these people who were disloyal to him. But I doubt if he's getting much out of those that are really, truly deep state. Now, yes, Clapper, James Clapper, John Brennan, those other people who lied to Congress about the deep state operations within the CIA, they have been removed from the classified, their ability to have access to classified documents. And so they are deep state and they have been removed and retired from government. But there are sub-level managers that still remain that no one except John Brennan could tell you who they are, or James Clapper, and they're not going to talk. And so it's going to be very difficult, even for Tulsi Gabbard, to find out. If you are in a government position, high government position, filtering information to Donald Trump, if you don't understand conspiracy, you're going to get blindsided by bad information from the NSA. I mean, if they come and tell you that so-and-so is a leader in conspiracy and we've got to take him out with a missile, how do you know? How do you know that they're telling you the truth? And in fact, this is even a bigger issue with Donald Trump's vow to release the files on JFK, RFK assassination, and Martin Luther King assassination.
Before I forget, brothers and sisters, if you are enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ding the bell for notifications. Your support means the world to me and helps the channel grow. And hey, if you want to contribute to the program, I do prefer Venmo first, then Cash App, then PayPal, then Zelle. And I've got cool products. I got cool merch. That's all being designed. I get a percentage of it. And that's if you're interested. Remember, your comments are what keep this community thriving. So drop your thoughts below. And if you're feeling extra generous, consider becoming a YouTube member or sending a thanks, a super thanks right there. The button's right below the screen during our videos. Now back to the topic.
There's no way the deep state is going to release all that information. It's interesting that the executive order of Trump, whoever wrote that, might well be deep state because it doesn't say release all the files. It says release additional files.
Right.
Additional files. And so that's an out for the deep state. Well, we can throw some additional files at Donald Trump. How would he know? Now, the reason I would know if the files were correct or full is if it fingered the mafia hitmen that the CIA fired to do the shooting from the grassy knoll. If that isn't in there, then that's not the complete files. Now, you may say, maybe the CIA didn't document that. Well, they do. You know, what's interesting about the deep state, they have this fetish about documentation. They tend to document everything, even incriminating stuff. And that's why they have to keep it secret. But I can guarantee you the files on RFK's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy, is not going to tell you that his bodyguard, who RFK Jr. has actually gone public and said his name, who he was, who fired the 238 bullets into his back, into RFK's back. Remember, Sirhan was shooting from the front with a 22 revolver with 6 bullets in it. 22 bullets, and caliber bullets. And he died, according to the autopsy, which Kennedy, being a family member, was able to get 238 bullets to the back and 1 into the spine. And then Martin Luther King, they're not going to release any of those files, I believe. As I say, might have told your audience in the past, when I was in Washington, J. Edgar Hoover had died and Martin Luther King was killed. And I asked the assistant director of the FBI, Patrick Gray, what's in the files that they have locked away for 50 years that they don't want the public to see. And he said, well, I can't tell you specifically because they're classified, but I can tell you in general that of the 13 file cabinets, 8 of them are full of the pornographic surveillance we have on Martin Luther King in his trysts with prostitutes almost every night.
Wow.
And the other 5 file cabinets are his dealings with the Communist Party. So there's the national hero that we were supposed to celebrate on the day Trump was inaugurated. And every year in the World Affairs Brief, I blow the whistle on Martin Luther King and why this is the greatest religious hypocrite in the history of the world. You know, it's immoral. Even in his Nobel Prize ceremony in Sweden, he was with prostitutes every night there with the staff, having orgies.
Right. I know you've told me that before, and I've heard that some other places. You know, I mean, even John F. Kennedy did the same.
An immoral son of a gun. Yeah.
Right. Let me ask you something. Do you think that Lyndon B. Johnson had anything to do with any connections with the deep state at that time, or whatever we were calling the deep state at that time? Do you think that he had something to do with John F. Kennedy's assassination?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. There has been this tape recording that was promoted by Alex Jones from someone who was the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, admitting that he got orders from Lyndon B. Johnson to kill the president. And so this seems to be absolute proof that Lyndon B. Johnson was behind it. But you see, it doesn't explain all the complexity of what happened, because you still have the facts out there that there were 2 mafia hitmen on the grassy knoll. How would Johnson work through the CIA to do that? You know, these are puppet presidents. These are not people who give orders to the deep state. The deep state has their own chain of command. It doesn't explain how you completely exonerated every conspiracy except, the Oswald theory in the Warren Commission. How did Lyndon B. Johnson control the Warren Commission? You see, it doesn't explain any of those things. This wasn't a simple, hey, go out and shoot the president. This was a complex operation that only the deep state could have done. So I'm very skeptical of that recording or the veracity. In fact, the deep state has a very interesting habit. They sometimes put out forged letters that tell the truth about something in the deep state. And then they declare the letter a forgery. So in the process of declaring the letter a forgery, the content of the letter gets discredited, even though it's true. So oftentimes they will do diversion tactics, like the CIA had Osama bin Laden lookalikes, 2 of them, in fact. Mm-hmm. One of them got on video and took credit for the World Trade Center attack to promulgate the diversion of the fact that this wasn't a deep state operation, this was an actual terrorist operation. Well, Osama bin Laden, the real one, worked for the CIA.
Right. And his family was friends with the Bush family.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And he died 2 years before Obama sent the SEAL Team 6 in to kill him in Abbottabad, Pakistan, meaning that they killed one of the lookalikes.
Wasn't he from Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
Yeah. So he was a Sunni. He was a Sunni. Sorry.
All of the so-called hijackers from Saudi Arabia as well. And they were recruited by the Saudis, and they paid for their lessons, taking flight school lessons with Cessna aircraft, just as a cover, as a diversion so that it would be somewhat believable that they could hijack an airline. In any case, I don't believe the story about now. Lyndon B. Johnson was not a good person. I mean, he was ruthless. He was a bad guy. Um, but the deep state doesn't really let someone like that into the center of the core of these major conspiracies. They're a loose cannon.
They want a yes man as a
Yes.
president. So let
Yeah.
me ask you this. So when he's raising his hand and he's getting sworn in on the airplane and Jackie's next to him and she's got blood on her coat, who's the guy over here that kind of winks at him and smiles? You know what I'm talking about?
Wasn't that John J. McCloy?
I think it might have been.
Yeah. Yeah. He's
Um,
deep. He was real deep state.
but
Yeah.
they're winking and LBJ's smiling. He might have known something was going to happen, maybe.
Yeah, that's very true. But the fact that he ordered it, no, it's way too big of an operation for Lyndon B. Johnson to even conceive of, let alone carry out.
And he could have just been going, see, I told you were going to be president or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah,
You know?
still locked up in national security archives. And I'll tell you, they're not going to be released. And as I say, Trump won't know the difference. He won't know what is released, if it's the whole story or not. Saying in Martin Luther King's case, the entire file cabinets are dirt on Martin Luther King. What are they going to send to Trump and claim that they're releasing the files? They're going to truck in all 13 file cabinets to the White House? I don't think so.
No.
Is he even going to discuss what's in them if they showed him? I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
It would
No.
be politically incorrect to the utmost degree to denigrate Martin Luther King in a media that venerates him as much as they discourage conspiracy theories and criticism of vaccines.
Well, okay. So let me kind of go back to Trump a little, and it kind of relates to what you're talking about as far as no real transparency, or what I would say, even what would you call it? A justice theater or too much leniency. You never really get true justice for the deep state. It even seems like it's a controlled opposition. You wouldn't say, though, that Trump is part of this controlled opposition. I don't believe so. I don't believe his vice president is either. I think they're very sincere men. But then you never know who's the mole or how many moles there are, right?
Well, I don't think Trump is. As I say, he's too much of a loose cannon to be controlled to carry a secret, any secret. But J.D. Vance, I'm suspicious of as a Manchurian candidate. Remember, nobody in law school, especially at Harvard or Yale, has the time to write a novel while you're studying day and night about case law. No one. I don't care how smart you are. So he's got a ghostwriter writing that thing, and then a Hollywood film makes it into an
I know.
award-winning movie.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
that doesn't happen with real conservatives,
Nope,
right? So
it sure doesn't.
he is very articulate. He's very smart. He's much better debater than Donald Trump on the issues, et cetera. But I don't trust him
Well,
because
wasn't he wasn't he affiliated or didn't he?
yeah, with Peter Thiel.
Yeah, and the Bilderbergs.
No, not necessarily
Oh, I thought he
Bilderberg.
went to some Bilderberg
Peter
meeting.
Thiel did. Peter Thiel
Ah,
does.
okay.
Yeah. Who sponsored J.D. Vance and
Yeah.
funded him. So you see, there is a deep state connection there that you got to be careful. Now, the deep state uses sophisticated. Look at their putting Brett Kavanaugh before Donald Trump, and he gets nominated to the Supreme Court. Now, Neil Gorsuch turns out to be a good conservative. He doesn't know anything about conspiracy, but Brett Kavanaugh's deep state. I mean, anybody who was involved in a deep state cover up, like the murder of Vince Foster, the Clinton's attorney, is deep state. And he was number two man in the cover up. So they've always got an angle on him. Yeah, he can be a conservative jurist, but when they need to twist the knife, they give him the phone call on the knife.
Mm-hmm.
He'll vote the way that they want him to vote. And Amy Comey Barrett is not probably deep state, but she's so mainstream, she's manipulable, highly manipulable.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so those three, John Roberts, who's got actual background blackmail stuff against him, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Comey Barrett do not constitute part of a solid Supreme Court conservative majority.
So, if that kind of gets me thinking, if you go back far enough, where did it all begin? Well, we know if we go back to even the 80s, the 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, there's always this, the CIA had somebody there. But do you think it began uh, with the Clinton administration, George Bush Sr., maybe, was where things started really happening, trickling in more of the deep state into the CIA and the NSA, and then
Well, it's hard to quantify. They were very active in controlling Eisenhower, for example. And they were um, very active, of course, in Roosevelt and Truman administration, where they had a lot of communists brought into directly the Roosevelt administration because of Eleanor Roosevelt was a closet communist who brought in all of these people like Alger Hiss and Lamont and others that Harry Hopkins, were full communist Russian spies, etc. Um, and then it was the Dulles brothers and Milton Eisenhower, a globalist who was controlling Eisenhower. Then you had your Harvard boys under McNamara controlling Kennedy. McGeorge Bundy was the one who canceled the air support for the Bay of Pigs operation.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was the the evening after JFK had authorized it, and then he canceled it while JFK was asleep. That's what made JFK vow to get rid of CIA covert operations, and one of the reasons why it sealed his death warrant. When you try to cancel the deep state, as a puppet president, and Kennedy knew that he'd been put in to power by corruption through his father, Joseph Kennedy, buying off mafia to help coerce a lot of
And
votes
then
in
you're gonna say,
Chicago.
I'm gonna bite the hand that fed me.
No, but you see, JFK knew that he got in through corruption through his father, but he didn't feel like he was controlled. He did not act like a puppet president. He knew that they were protecting him in his sexual dalliances with dozens of women. He had to have sex with someone every night or he got a headache, he said. And that wasn't his wife.
Wow,
But yeah,
crazy.
he was surrounded by deep state people. And of course, the Jimmy, Nixon had Henry Kissinger, arch deep state, leader as his national security advisor. And that's what he gave away the Vietnam War at the Paris Peace Talk, brought China into the UN with a seat on the Security Council. And then you have, Newt Gingrich, who's deep state within the organization entrance, the first act in government as Speaker of the House. So the deep state's been everywhere. In George W. Bush administration, it was Dick Cheney, who was the vice president, who was his handler, who ran the entire government because George W. Bush was just a pure puppet, didn't know anything about foreign affairs or domestic affairs when he became president.
Wait, back up for a second. What about Newt Gingrich?
Newt Gingrich, about his contract with America, where he did a lot of mail order and got all of these votes, and and then he was elected speaker when he got into Congress with that contract. And the first thing he did was not to do with anything with the contract from there, was to give China World Trade Organization access, which gave it most favored trading status. That's what gave all of the motivation for U.S. corporations to do business with China. That was a big thing, a big globalist thing. So
Wow.
I haven't ever trusted Newt Gingrich, even though he's very smart.
Well, yeah, he'll call out other globalists, but
Oh
he's
yeah,
basically one himself.
yeah.
Or well, some of these we've talked about this before. You've got two types of people that are involved in this. You got one motivated by money, and then others that have the money, don't need it, but they're motivated by power, and they're usually up here. But the
And
money
the highest
followers
level,
the money chasers are down here. Go ahead.
remember, the highest level of motivation is the promise of immunity.
Right.
You see, when you promise people immunity from their sexual dalliances and the deep state covers for your illegal acts, that's a major motivation for corrupt people. Now, there's a lot of people below that level that are just in there for the advancement they're promised, and You play along, you be a yes man, and you go up the ladder. But you have to get involved in pretty deep, disgusting moral immorality in order to get into the upper levels of the deep state. And then at the highest levels, there is that satanic revelatory connection. And there's a promise of immunity there too, promise immunity from the chains of hell, that you won't
Yeah.
have to ever go to hell. And, people like Bill Clinton, who's a puppet president, who's born as a Christian, that's appealing to him. Yeah, if I join in this stuff, I won't have to pay the sins of hell that I know are out there. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Do we give Satan too much credit? He's not always winning each battle, right? Or he's allowing the deep state to battle each other, all the wicked people. But do they lose sometimes? Are they shook up right now, or are they just slyly backing off?
No, they have actually lost once again, as in 2016. They had assumed that their 10% of theft of the election was going to make the difference. It didn't. They were assuming that they'd be able to steal the election with truckloads of ballots in this election, and it didn't work because the RNC had lawyers with judges at speed dial on their telephone ready to stop any attempt to stop the counting. So, yes, the deep state lost this thing, but they're not out for the count because they're still all there, except for the top heads that have been removed here. They've got dozens of possible replacements. These subheads that are under there, they're the ones that really know what's going on
Right.
in these deep state illegal operations. And they're still there. And Donald Trump is not going to be able to root them out. And remember that one of the greatest weaknesses of Donald Trump is his, how should I say, his flawed conscience. As we've talked about conscience on the show, it's very important towards getting warning signals that you're being deceived. And Donald Trump has been so immoral in his life and doesn't relate to the word repentance that he's being penalized. He still thinks that Kim Jong Un, a dictator of North Korea, is a pen pal of his, a fine person that he can influence. He thinks he's now, softened his line on China now. And of course, Putin is hardening his line, seeing how far he can push Donald Trump. But when these people meet with him, they know how to flatter him. Look at Bill Gates, got an audience with Donald Trump. Donald Trump came away from Bill Gates saying, wow, that was impressive. You got to worry when the president of the United States is impressed with someone, a snow job that Bill Gates gave a president, because that means that he's going to be influenced in terms of the new vaccines that are going to come out through the Gates Foundation. And the same thing with Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg claims, oh, I was a victim of government censorship. I'll tell you, there's another interview that shows that he was the direct part of that censorship. He was pushing it himself. So these are woke people like Target. Target, the corporation, with the bi-gender bathrooms and other things, and their gay apparel that they were selling and transgender apparel, and claim that they're dumping DEI. Nobody really who knows the Target leadership believes it.
Right.
They realize there's a backlash coming that they want to avoid for financial reasons, but they have not changed. These people have not repented. The gay agenda and transgender agenda is growing still by leaps and bounds, and we're headed in that direction. But we've got, in my opinion, the Lord's given us a little more time to prepare with. That's about all we're going to get, is a little bit of leeway in time. It's going to slow things down. But the deep state is engendering a couple of surprise attacks on Donald Trump, in my opinion. One of those is going to be because of Donald Trump's braggadocious inaugural speech, and it was over the top in terms of bragging about America, the new golden age, and we're just going to be better than we've ever been, and we're the only nation in the world that is going to do these great things. And that's offensive to other nations, of course, but you're just asking the deep state to throw you a curveball in terms of the economy.
Right.
And they can pull. He's got Scott Bessent, a gay person, as head of the Treasury, and is keeping Jeremy Powell as head of the Federal Reserve. Those are two deep state people. And they can pull the plug on the economy anytime they want by drying up the money supply. And this stock market bubble nearing 50,000 is going to collapse. Anything like that could happen, and Donald Trump would not be able to do anything. Now, of course, he's already blowing the budget. He's talking about spending billions going to Mars. He's talking about being more efficient, but he's also said to Congress, he says, we need to get rid of this annual debate over the debt ceiling limit. I don't want to have to vote on the debt. In other words, if you're going to balance the budget, why would you care about stopping the debt ceiling limit vote? That's the only thing that amounts to a balanced budget amendment. And it only takes a majority. It doesn't take 2/3 to do an amendment. If you have a balanced budget amendment, it means you must balance the budget. And if you don't have the political will to cut spending, which no politician does, because that's how you get unelected, then it's going to mandate you raise taxes. And Trump could proclaim all he wants how he doesn't want to raise taxes, but
Right.
that's the danger about a balanced budget. The great thing about the debt ceiling limit, you simply takes a majority to say no more debt. Now you got to balance the budget.
Okay.
And
So
he doesn't want that. That means he wants to spend with abandon. He's going to spend trillions in excess of deficit spending, just like he did during his first term.
Okay, so that brings it, I'm glad you brought all that up, because I've never fanboyed over Trump. I did vote for him twice, obviously. But here's my question. Will people start to realize, and I don't think anybody's ever brought this up really yet, maybe they have, when he starts not following through with some of maybe his grandiose promises, will the American people that were in his constituency start to become disillusioned with his administration?
I say no, because the illusion of hope springs eternal. At least that Donald Trump wants to do right, even though I've said from the beginning, he doesn't have the skills, he doesn't have the arguments, he doesn't have the knowledge base to do it. We know that he wants to make America great. So hope will spring eternal. There will always be something. But you see, what I'm preaching against is the whole concept of a temporal savior that's going to change the direction of this country. No one can change the direction of this country when the morality is going down and the judgments of God are coming upon this country. Now, he is giving us more breathing space. That's what the Trump has done. But you see, what I've just told an audience that I spoke to this week, whenever a conservative gets elected, like Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump, funding for conservative causes dries up, and so does preparedness. Because people think we've won, Trump's going to save us. I don't have to spend all this money on solar systems, on high security relocation or a safe room or any of those things. And they're going to be caught dead in the water when the lights go out at the start of World War III, and where no preparation is possible. There's nothing left to buy. So people have to understand, don't rest on your laurels and think that Trump is going to save us. He won't. You can sit back and watch him try to do all these wonderful, and they have been wonderful. The many executive orders have at least stymied and stopped, but they are not going to remove or reverse what's happening to the morality of the country. And thus, when the deep state comes back into operation and throws a depression at us, possibly, or a war, which is surely coming, and it may well be during this administration, Trump's going to get the blame for it. Still, his supporters have shown they're never going to lose faith in Donald Trump, and that faith is misplaced. But even though it's misplaced, it's the illusion of hope in a savior that we won't have to act. It's the same thing in evangelical Christianity. If you believe that the rapture comes before the tribulation, that you won't have to go through it, you will not prepare. And they don't prepare. In fact, the entire saved by grace by a one-time salvation experience means that I'm saved no matter what I do is antithetical to change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why evangelical Christian and Mormons who believe in this no perfection required and it'll all be gifted to us in the next life, that's our own version of saved by grace. And it's antithetical to change. And it's antithetical to the promptings you get from conscience of the Lord to change your weaknesses. And they're mostly temporal promptings, and that's why people don't recognize them as from the Lord.
Well, okay, so I agree. I agree. I mean, that's kind of how we used to teach things in the church, where you had to be accountable that God's plan involves different degrees of glory. It doesn't involve, one heaven. So let me ask you this. You're saying people will still love Trump for his good intentions
Yes,
because he's still on our side.
yes.
That's kind of an easy role to play, I guess, as president of the United States. Uh, okay, so how much time do you have left?
Well, let's see. We didn't start right on time, so I
Right.
probably got at least 10 minutes.
Okay. So let's play. What was that program I always say? Crossfire.
All right.
I'll throw something out there and you say it. You tell me. I'll throw something out there and you tell me what you feel about it. Elon Musk being in the Trump administration. What was that?
Well,
Just
Elon Musk as a person, I don't believe is ultimately trustworthy. His wife has been involved in satanic rituals, and he's made statements that talk about transgender and high technology solving everything. So I don't trust that point of view, but I do think he has had a conversion to free markets, and more of the Trump agenda. And he will use his ample mental powers to do a good job about doing efficiency in government. Um, but as I say, I wouldn't trust him as a person to make good judgments about his own personal life or understanding conspiracy or speaking up against it. Now, in that regard, for example, RFK has compromised severely in order to get confirmed as HHS secretary by claiming he's now pro vaccine. If you read any of his two major works, The Real Anthony Fauci or The Wuhan Cover Up,
mm-hmm.
he eviscerates vaccines as to safety and effectiveness. And it was incredible how you saw both Democrats and Republicans gang up on him to counter anything against vaccines and anything in favor of conspiracy. It
Right.
shows that Democrats and Republicans have been totally molded into this concept that we've got to, it's like motherhood and apple pie. You've got to be pro vaccine or you can't be a public servant. You've got to be anti conspiracy. They drilled and drilled him. I think it must have pained him to have to say he's pro vaccine. You can't believe he actually believes that if you read his books. And it was obvious in the hearings that the Democrats didn't believe it. And so they tried to put him on a vow that carries to heaven that he will never again utter anything anti-vaccine. And he wouldn't do it, but he said, I'm going to be science and data based rather than political based in my judgment. But that's the major things that the establishment deep state is really concerned about is people accepting vaccines, which I won't touch with a 10-foot pole anymore.
No,
They're just too
neither.
dangerous.
I
Especially,
never got it. I got sick with COVID. I ended up in the hospital. I almost died. I was on oxygen. So I never ended up. I never got the vaccine. The doctor actually told me after I got out of the hospital, you shouldn't take this vaccine because it might kill you.
that's right. And it is killing people. I mean, the turbo cancers that are coming out. I've had two in-laws that took the vaccine because of their jobs. Both, well, one died of turbo cancers and the other
Oh
got cancer
man.
and then had it miraculously healed, fortunately, because of prayers of the faithful. But I'll tell you, they both learned their lesson, one by death and one by getting healed over it. But I mean, you talk about the heart problems and the other things. And remember, the only reason everybody doesn't get these deadly side effects is because they only put the real vaccine in 5% of the batches. Otherwise, they would have killed everybody.
Right.
And they would have destroyed people's faith in vaccines. And now all vaccines are going to be mRNA based, customized to yourself, and deadly. So don't go there. People need to wake up to these things.
Okay. So I want to ask you this. Are we going to see real accountability, justice for some of the deep state players within the last 8 years where Trump promised to bring justice? Or do you think that he has backed off a little and said, you know what, because he did say, I didn't know it was this big. Do you think that's why they've kind of eased up on him? They're not attacking him as bad as they did before Biden's administration.
Well, remember, it's only because what he's doing is very popular with the thinking people in the United States now, who are generally saying, yeah, we really didn't like this DEI stuff. And so we're glad that somebody had the courage. We didn't have the courage to oppose it, but we're glad Trump has the courage to oppose it. I mean, think of all the airline pilots that didn't want to take the vaccine, that don't like DEI, but didn't dare say anything about it for fear of losing it. Now they're free to say it because it's the law of the land now. The DEI is out.
Right.
So you can't trust their silence on these issues, on the fact that they are converted. They are not converted. But it's going to take. The big thing about Donald Trump is that he's only going to be able to go so deep. The reason he isn't going to prosecute these people, they've all been given a preemptive pardon. Remember that. Brennan, all of these people that are involved in the deep state handed Biden a list. We want these guys with preemptive pardon, Clinton, Fauci, all of these people. And it would be very difficult to go after them anyway, because even though they did wrong things and other things, it's hard to get a real conviction unless you get the wiretaps on them discussing treasonous things. And
right.
Say, give you those wiretaps to be able to present to court. And the justices are controlled by the deep state, especially in the Washington, D.C. area. And it's doubtful you'd get a conviction. So I think it's unlikely that he'll be able to dig deep into the deep state and get accountability.
Well, yeah, it's always a one-on-one basis how you bring people to justice. They don't just round up the whole bunch and try everybody. You have to do it, execute it one at a time. Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of felt that way too. At the same time, we, going to the beginning of the program where we talked about wokeism, kind of making a full round where you said it's not completely gone. Kamala Harris, what's going to happen to her? And then what about the Clintons?
They're gone.
The Clintons are gone?
They've lost their usefulness. They're getting too old now. She's old hat. Kamala Harris was a laughingstock, even among Democrats, so she's gone.
Yeah.
They're not going to promote her again. So it'll be new blood coming up after Trump, and anything can happen. We could be in World War III by then. We could be under a depression. Trump's not going to last long in terms of this ride into glory. They're going to undercut this pretty close.
Yeah.
I think maybe this next year is probably the last guaranteed good year. If you're going to sell a home, that the prices may still be up, because once we get into a depression, the whole housing bubble collapse, the stocks are going to collapse, pensions are going to collapse, people are going to be in a world of hurt. It could only happen when the Fed pulls the money supply. And Trump is tempting them to cut his promises of massive prosperity and the good life returning to America. They just can't wait to see him cut down to size on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see the CIA, all the deep state shadow governments being weeded out? Maybe some of the leftist Democrats leaving those places and replaced with true constitutionalists, military people that love this country, nationalists, true nationalists back maybe in the CIA and FBI running those places, or we'll never see that. I don't know.
Well, remember, the dark side of government is still in deep cover right now. And you can operate the CIA on the white side and not even know that the dark side is still operating without your knowledge.
Right.
If you're the FBI director. And as I say, I talked to a guy who was an informant who got invited to a party of deep state people. The FBI handler told him that guy's CIA, that's DHS, and nobody know. Congress doesn't even know we exist. We have our own funding supply. So that's the real deep state. It's not just unelected bureaucrats that Trump is going after.
How does it stay so organized then? If the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing in those, in even in the NSA, the Council on Foreign Relations. I mean, you can go on and on. Is it somebody's money that is calling the shots? Is it, from outside that's putting those people in place?
Well, only at the World Economic Forum level do you have a lot of up and coming globalists who may not be knowing deep state. It's very few of the World Economic Forum people know there's a third world war coming that's going to decimate the World Economic Forum goals of an AI robotic society. They're being controlled by big money and other people, but it's the real deep state has a very rigid hierarchy. Everybody knows exactly who gives them the orders and who doesn't give them orders, and they have a chain of command that goes right up to the deepest parts, past the George Soros, past the Henry Kissingers. Nobody knows who's at the very top, the dozen, or the triumvirate that controls however Satan engineers his leadership, but they're there. And so there's a difference if you're in a real deep state operation, you know who your chain of command is. There's no doubt. It's not just general influence like it is in the World Economic.
Yeah. Well, Joel, one more question. One more. So we talked about this before. As much as there's a true church on the earth, the adversary does meet with somebody, you would say.
Oh, absolutely. He's got revelatory powers too. He has very direct revelatory control over his deep state operations in Russia and China and in the Western globalists. And he is marching, promising all three of those predator centers that they're going to have success, that they're going to win. Of course, he will pick the ultimate winners. And the Lord himself, I think, will stymie that. It's my personal opinion in World War III that Satan loses control over his well-ordered New World Order scheme, and that evil begins to fight against evil, and it becomes a real mess in the aftermath of World War III. We'll never return to normalcy, I don't think, when this war comes. So you got to be prepared before the war starts, because no preparation is going to be available after it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joel. Come back.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.